Chef, good to
Hello.
have you here, man.
Great to be here.
I am so excited for this. I've been a fan of yours and of Otium for long before we met. Mostly because everyone knows who listens to this podcast. I'm a huge theater guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we stumbled upon it as somewhere needing to go to dinner before the Amundsen, which
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, for over a decade, it's been my spot, man.
That's awesome.
So it's awesome to have you. I love food. I love eating food. I love watching food shows. I love cooking. Let's
Me
start.
too.
Let's
Me
start.
too.
Can we start with the passion? What do
Yeah.
you love about it?
I mean, I think, that's sort of always changing
Yeah.
about it. I mean, as far as being a chef, I would say. But currently, I really love I just love food in general. I love exploring different cultures through food.
Yeah.
Being able to travel and see like how people eat. I love like cooking with like moms or grandmas in the kitchen or like dads or like whoever, that's kind of like traditional sort of recipes and like learning, different like tips and like different things that we don't necessarily do in restaurants. Obviously, I love to go to restaurants and I love to work with other chefs and whatnot. But I think, it's just one of those things that ultimately bring people together,
Yeah.
And I would say my real appreciation for it probably comes down to my childhood and the importance that are the traditions that we had as a family growing up. And like there's 5 of us kids and each of us had a job or had a chore, had a place in the kitchen, whether it be setting the table, clearing the table, like helping my mom with the prep or dishes afterwards or whatnot. And I think that ultimately brought all of the kids really close together.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the reason why we're still close, and it's something that is something that I really make sure in my home today, that I really teach my kids about cooking. And we sit down for either breakfast or dinner or both on a daily basis. And I think just that kind of like breaking bread with somebody is just is a really nice like ceremonial kind of
Absolutely.
thing. Yeah.
See if you vibe with this, because I was talking to my wife about this just last night, because I was really trying to pinpoint what I love about food.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, like, I have an addiction to food competition cooking shows.
Yeah.
Like, I even watch the ones that I don't like. Like, I'm like, this premise is stupid and I don't even like the host, but I still watch every episode. And I think it's because I think what you and me as a musician do are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
In that there's a finite amount of notes.
Yeah.
And there's a finite amount of flavors and ingredients and stuff like that. But there's like an infinite amount of manipulating those into something new
Mm-hmm.
and exciting and different. And so when I'm watching a competition cooking show, they get their ingredients, they get their time, they get their challenge. And I'm like, oh, what can they do with this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's such a cool puzzle of something that seems so finite but can be so infinite with how you manipulate it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, when I cook, it's like people are like, oh, how do you like cook a steak, or how do you make this, or how do you make that? And yeah, there's a sort of general rule about like, I could sit here and I can tell you the process, but the reality is I do it by feeling every single time. And like, it's, even though they might be like small variables or large, like I'm always constantly doing it differently and trying to make it better. It's like the idea of, making, and this is like one of the reasons why I really kind of fell in love with it at the beginning, is like the idea that you can make something over and over again and you're trying to get it better. It doesn't always get better each time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go backwards and you go forwards again, but it's the idea of like just constantly trying to make it better, and the instant gratification that you get from that, like, I present a dish to you, you eat it, and you're really into it, and it's like, oh wow, like, it makes me feel good, because you're cooking for people, and then the other aspect of it is like, if you don't like it, then I have the opportunity potentially to do something different, and change it and make something for you that you do like, and then it's like that same feeling again, that gratification.
Yeah, we probably share this in common too. I have a 9-year-old, and I know you have 4 small ones under 9, right? What's
Yeah,
the
Hunter's
oldest?
the oldest. She's 8, and then Liam is 7. He just turned 7. River's 4, and then Leo is just turned 2.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I have to constantly innovate and create new things because her palate changes every 6 months.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly inventing new dishes for her.
Yeah, feeding kids is it's a tough one.
Yeah. When you look up kind of your career arc, 2 things jump out. One, there's no culinary school on there. And there's also like barely anything before the French Laundry, which is one of the best restaurants in the world.
Yeah.
How? Like, take me through how that even came about.
Yeah, so I grew up doing construction with my father from a fairly early age, probably like 5th grade or something like that. Like every weekend we'd go and we'd work, and then in the summers I'd work with him. As soon as I got old enough to work, like, on a job site, I had to go work with him. But my dad was my child. Remembering my dad, I mean, he's still alive. So, but thinking back on the childhood, it was really. I spent a lot of time working with him, and he instilled like great work ethic in me. He was the kind of person that, I remember we borrowed the tiller from the neighbors, Neva and Marlene, and when I returned it, it had to be like basically not rebuilt, but like like it had to be like brand new.
Yeah.
And my dad always taught a lot of the work that we would do on the weekends might be like volunteering for different, either going to church and like working on the church, or going to like people's houses in the church that might need help with some sort of construction style work. So we did that really my whole childhood, and then in high school on my 18th birthday, actually, I started work at a restaurant, and my sister's husband used to work there when he was younger. Still filled in a few shifts, a week on the weekends every once in a while to help him out when it was busy. And that job as a dishwasher was something that was completely different than anything I've done before. And I excelled at it really fast. I thought of it as like a game of like, can I clear like all the dishes before like the next round of dishes came in and stuff like that. Like I was just, I worked really hard, and I was very proud of the way that I worked, and therefore I moved up very fast, and I listened, and I took direction, and I really worked and excelled in this kitchen. And during that time, I was working with a French chef, and he talked about like his ability to travel, and like he's from France, and he worked in England and Scotland, and obviously in France and New York and Napa and San Francisco. Just like, oh man, this guy traveled all over the world to like, as a cook, as a chef. And then I was like, this is a great opportunity for me. Maybe this is something that I'm, into. And so I started to explore that. I got really, really passionate about it. Like I would wake up in the morning, I would read cookbooks. I'd read cookbooks on my break. I'd read cookbooks when I went home, and just like really like submerge myself into like cooking and culinary, and like at the highest level, reading French Laundry cookbook was one, and just reading like even old cookbooks that were like European. They were like like somewhere in French, and it's like the Repertoire de la Cuisine or La Russe Gastronomique, and like reading basically like an encyclopedia or like a dictionary of like of cooking versus like an actual cookbook with pictures and stuff like that. So, like I was really diving deep. And I was like, okay, this is something that I want to pursue and check out. So I flew myself to New York. I was probably 19 or 20 years old. And it was my first time on an airplane, first time traveling by myself. Went to New York City, then took a train up to Hyde Park. and spent a week at the Culinary Institute up there, Culinary Institute of America. And when I came back, I was like, you know what? Like, I wasn't the most studious person in school, but I was a very hard worker. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a commitment to myself, and that commitment's gonna be I'm gonna go and work for the best, and I am going to like read as much as I can and like make sure that I like what I'm not going to school for, I will make sure that I learn on my own.
Yeah.
And at that time, there were two chefs that were really like the pinnacle for me. One was Thomas Keller, and the other one was Alain Ducasse. Alain Ducasse is like, very French kitchen. They speak French. It's like, okay, this is a big commitment.
Got to learn culinary and French at the same time.
Exactly. And then, Thomas Keller had the French Laundry in Napa Valley, and I grew up in Northern California, and I was like, okay, this isn't that far from my parents' house. And like, it's one of the best restaurants in the world. Like, this is where I want to work.
Yeah.
So I went and I ate there, and I turned in my resume. I made sure that the chef was going to be there that night. Turned in my resume and said, chef, I really want to work for you. He handed me a business card, said, yeah, give me a call, like whatever, right? So I called and 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 like I just kept calling, and like so much so that like, when they would say, kitchen, French Laundry kitchen, whatever, yeah, is Thomas Keller there, Chef Keller there? No. Okay, can I leave a message? I was like embarrassed to leave a message again. I was like, I'm like, they for sure know my voice by now. And eventually I had the opportunity to stage there. And staging is like working for free in a restaurant, like basically like a tryout.
Yeah.
So I went there and I tried out for a day. And then, I was like, I called and I called and I called and I called. And then I finally received a letter in the mail that said I'd been hired and here's my start date. And, I worked there. And I think, kind of the funny thing about that story is that a couple of years later, I found out something that was like pretty funny, but like so every year they take two different breaks. In the wintertime, they take 2 weeks off. In the summer, they take a week off. So basically New Year's Eve is our last service.
Mm-hmm.
And then that night we all like get together, all the employees, we sit down, we eat and drink until late in the night. And, we're eating basically, all the leftover food and all the leftover, like whatever, cause we're gonna be closed for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So during that time, it's kind of a tradition where we sit down and people would stand up and tell stories and whatnot. And the chef de cuisine at the time, Eric Ziebel, goes, I have a story. And basically told this story about like how I was hired by accident.
No way.
Yeah. So I was hired there by accident, like sort of like a glitch in our misunderstanding, I guess. Like Eric Ziebold had said no, and Thomas Keller had said yes. And they were surprised when I like showed up that day. There was actually, I showed up the first day, there was another guy right next to me and we were working on the same station. And I think they were a little confused as to why I was there. And they, they were like, oh, maybe we'll send him down to Bouchon or whatever. And then, but for whatever reason, they kept me around and I continued to work there. And I worked there for, 13 years. And it was a pretty amazing experience. Definitely an intense kitchen. Definitely a, being a young chef there, like a tough kitchen to like really like, it's a huge leap from where I was before.
Yeah. Is this a path that you would recommend to a young chef at this point? Or are you like, go to culinary school, I had a lot to learn, I could have gone in more prepared? Or did you feel like trial by fire was the way to go?
I feel like everybody is different. So it really depends on your personality. I definitely don't think you have to go to a culinary school. If I was to go back over and do it again, I would probably, of course it depends on like sort of your journey, and what you ultimately want to do. But like, I would go back and I would do business. I would get a degree in business or something like that, because for years and years and years, all I studied was food, right?
Yeah.
It was food, it was techniques. It was like, and then all of a sudden, I open up my own restaurant and it's like, I'm dealing with finances. I'm dealing with like everything else. And it's like, okay, well, I'm okay to learn. Like I get things sort of quickly. When it comes to all of that stuff, it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But like, if I had a really strong foundation in that, I feel like it would have been better for me.
Right. There's kind of like, is it? I'm thinking specifically of The Bear. Have you watched?
Mm-hmm.
And their portrayal of the high end kitchen and the intensity and you cannot F up type of environment.
Yeah.
Is that a Hollywood perception of what that environment is like, or is that very real, high pressure, intense every day?
The Bear's mellow. I mean, like the like people. I know there's a lot of different kitchens in the world.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of different levels of kitchen and stuff like that. And there's like different times, right? Like I'd say, the Bear is probably not incredibly realistic today.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit, but like that sort of intensity. I mean, it's like sort of very mellow in comparison to what the reality was like when I was growing up in the kitchen.
Wow.
And the kitchens that I spent time in, because during my breaks I would go and I would go on and I would go and travel and so we had the 2 weeks off in the winter, 1 week off in the summer, and I'd go and like work in England or go work in France or go work in Austria or Germany rather. And like, you know, like I traveled and I would go and work on my holidays just to kind of like go and experience the culture. Going, you know, being at one kitchen for a long time is good. You know, you have the opportunity to really learn how things are done, but you know, what you miss out on is like seeing what other people are doing. So I made sure to like spend that time, you know, spend my vacations kind of like going and exploring.
Yeah.
And getting that experience. But yeah, I mean, the Bear is, you know, I would say a lot of people that I talk to that might be in the industry but are not even in the industry anymore might be like, oh man, it's like flashbacks and it's like, you know, stresses me out and stuff like that. I laugh, you know, I that sort of feeling, that sort of environment, I thrive in. And not everybody does. Some people shut down. You know, but I personally thrive in that. I enjoy that. I laugh at it, you know, like I think even in the moment, it's funny sometimes, like sort of those really stressful, the more stressed, the better sometimes for me.
Yeah. So Joel McHale undersold it. Interesting. Is it the pressure of maintaining the Michelin star? We can't keep charging these prices unless it's perfect. Like what is the pressure that you feel in the kitchen in those moments?
I mean, the pressure for me at the French Laundry was everything had to be perfect. I mean, I would literally write down on a Post-it, you know, quotes every single day. And like, you know, like some of those quotes would be like, you have to be perfect in every aspect of the game, which is like a quote from like Any Given Sunday, you know, like, but, you know, they could be quotes from like whoever, whatever, a movie, a book, like a philosopher, like who, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like I would literally, you know, things to like push myself, things to have in a right mindset.
Yeah.
Put myself in the right mindset. But yeah, I mean, the pressure is pressure that you put on yourself. There's a lot of competition because, at that time the restaurant was the number one restaurant in the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, which was a crazy kind of thing to say or whatever, you know, it's like, you know, but it's, you know, it was ranked that by whoever.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's an environment that people travel from all over the world to eat there. Cooks and dining room team, like everybody, like, you know, wants to work there. So like, you know, you're working with people from all over the world as well, that have worked in all of these kitchens or restaurants, and you get like, you know, everybody, I guess you'd equate it to like a professional sports team, right? Like the difference between like, you know, like your high school basketball team or like the Lakers, you know, it's like, this is like everybody plays at such a high level.
Right.
So you're surrounding yourself with that. So, you know, you have to be on your A game, and then you're competing with other people in sort of this friendly kind of competition. And then, you know, there's this like, when I was the chef there's just like this pressure of like, okay, we have 3 Michelin stars, like we're the best restaurant, all this stuff. Like the only place to go is down.
Right.
Like, where do you go from there? You know, like if you're the best, like the only, you know, like one day you're not going to be the best, right? Like it's like, and you know, thinking about like, oh, do I lose, if I lost a star for Thomas Keller, like what is that feeling like? It's like
Right.
that pressure. I'm sure Thomas feels pressure, of course, but like that pressure was really on my shoulders.
Right.
And, so therefore nobody can mess up,
Right.
everything has to be perfect every single day.
Is there competition within the kitchen? Like, is the guy on sauces looking at you going, I could do better than that? Is there that vibe, or is it more family cohesion team vibe in the kitchen?
Um,
Or does it matter on who's in the kitchen?
it's, I mean, I would say it was different throughout my time at the French Laundry specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like at a sort of an elite level. Like, at Otium now, it's not like, there's not like necessarily that feeling of competition, but in the environment that I grew up in there, it was very much like we would, we would, we would have VIPs, right? And every day we would sit down and we'd write the menu for the next day.
Right.
All right, so every night after service, we'd sit down, we'd write our dishes, we'd come back in the next day, we'd prep, we'd work service. You'd also have VIPs. So it's very unique in the sense that, like, the chef de parties, or the chef of each station, the line cooks, were writing their own dishes. Yes, the chef would sometimes, give you the dish he wanted to run. Yes, for sure, the chef was like making sure that the dish was good in the sense of like kind of like talking through it, but you're like they're sort of helping you develop as a cook into a chef and like thinking about how to create food and stuff like that. But then there's also like the VIP moments where, when Thomas was on the pass, he would come in and he'd be like, order for two VIP tasting, and it'd be like, okay, he turned to the canapé cook. He's like, what do you have? He'd be like, soup, caviar, fish, custard. Okay, what do you have for soup? And then like whatever station you were on, you had to give him the set of like what you were going to run, and you created that set.
Mm-hmm.
And, if the guy on fish chose onions, you couldn't have onions. If somebody chose mushrooms, like we couldn't repeat ingredients.
Interesting.
And so for VIP specifically, so not only were we competing on our dishes that we were creating on a menu, but we're also competing on our VIP dishes.
Yeah.
And so you'd like look at the guy on canapé and see what he put out, and then you'd watch the guy on garde manger, and the guy on fish, and the guy on meat, and the guy on cheese and pastry, and it's like you're sort of, everybody's competing to have like sort of the best dish and be like, oh, that's tight.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. One of the best nights of my life. A buddy invited me to it was a Brad Pitt movie. I don't even remember what it was. It was a premiere of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like the after party, and then like the VIP after party.
Yeah.
And we were at the VIP after party, which was at Bouchon.
Mm-hmm.
And we were chatting it up with one of the people walking around serving food, and he liked us and was like, by the way, for the super VIPs, the kitchen is open with like a tasting menu type of thing. And each chef in there had created their own. There's like a little fish dish, a little meat dish. And it was one of the most mind-blowing experiences. We were just walking and each chef would explain the dish to you. And I think it was meant for like Brad Pitt, but we got to do it for some reason.
Yeah.
And it was the greatest thing that I've ever experienced. So good.
People like to see that. People like to kind of go behind the scenes, like interact with the chef. And that's kind of like the inspiration for Otium having like that wide open kitchen.
Right.
Just being able to like see the action. I always equate it to like a dinner and a show. It's like you're eating dinner, but you can like you're part of the action. And then like as a chef, you're like in the kitchen, you're not really aware of who you're like dining, like who's like eating your food or how they're eating it or whatever. But if you're like, if it's sort of like right there, then you get to see the guests eating the food and like that sort of. It's a different feeling as a chef. It's kind of hard to explain, but you're just like you're able to see different things. I remember as a chef at French Laundry, like before I became the head chef, I spent time working in the dining room, and I would just kind of like go in on my time off and like volunteer, and like I was captain of a table, I opened wine at a table, like I back waited, I ran food, and that experience gave me the opportunity to see how the guests were eating the food and approaching the food, and like certain things and certain techniques. You were like, oh, look, okay, like there's, and these are things that were like taught there, is like like, oh, we're sometimes there's a big bowl, and it's like it's like you have this beautiful like little like rabbit dish in this bowl, and this bowl is like this oversized bowl, and everything looks like beautiful and gorgeous and it's perfect. But then you watch the guests eating, and it's like, oh, when they put their silverware in that bowl, like the silverware falls down, and then if they put their silverware on its plate, like then then the plate is like, or then the table, if they put the silverware on the tablecloth is dirty. So you're like thinking like, okay, well, that's good to know, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need to figure out, maybe we don't use this bowl, or maybe we use it in a different way. Other times it might be like we used to do this like lamb, or it's just lamb loin, and then on top of it would be like a lamb mousse. So you had like these two different, preparations of meat, but they were like stuck together, and you'd see people kind of like playing around with the mousse, and like you're like, oh, like maybe like that's a little weird for people, and you like think about like, do I change that? Am I like confident in that? Like,
Right.
so it just gives you the ability to see how people are approaching the dishes, and hopefully you learn from that.
I feel that way every Sunday.
Yeah.
When I do a song and I look out, I'm going, boy, this song's not landing. People are sipping their coffee and staring at me right now. When did you and how did you know that it was time to leave and move on from the French Laundry?
I tried to leave before I became the chef. It was right after I did the Bocuse d'Or, and it was a culinary competition in Europe. And then I basically put in my notice with the head chef there, and he's like, yeah, no, you're not leaving. He's like, yeah, you're going to be the chef. And I said, okay. But I wanted to like go and like travel, like, it's an intense kitchen. So just kind of like go and take a little bit of time off. But the opportunity to become the chef there, I worked there for several years as a chef. I could have definitely worked there longer as a chef, but because I had spent so much time there already, and I was young, I was in my early 30s, and I was like, okay, it's time to sort of move on and see other things. And, I wanted to do my own thing.
Yeah. Is it even feasible to have a family, start a family, meet anybody, go on dates? Like, is it even feasible to do it in that environment at that age?
It is, but it's hard.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately one of the reasons why I left. It's like, I wanted to seek out like sort of, I wanted to pursue having a family for sure. I knew that was important to me.
Yeah.
And I wanted to seek out sort of other aspects rather than just standing behind the stove every single day.
Right.
And so that journey is what like made me take the leap to leave. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I didn't have a job. I just kind of left everything up in the air. I got offered, a chef job in New York. I was thinking about that. Ultimately, I decided to move down to LA and pursue a little bit of like a media. That didn't really work out right at the beginning. And, so I'm like, just kind of like figuring things out. But like part of, you're so immersed in that environment and that culture. You kind of need to like leave it and sort of like decompress a little bit and then figure out what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to like just kind of go from one thing to the next.
Yeah. When you were building Otium, when you were making all those decisions on what it would be, what did you take from the French Laundry, and then what did you also decide, I'm going to do it completely different from this?
So really at that time I'd only worked at 2 different restaurants before opening. I worked at Zachary Jack's, which was that first dishwashing job. Mm-hmm. And that was very like family oriented restaurant. So the husband was a chef. The wife ran the finances, the front of the house, and did a little bit of pastries. And, the people had worked there for so many years, and it's just like this sort of family aspect. They lived right behind the restaurant. They had 2 kids. Like I would even babysit the kids sometimes. Like, it was very like the kids would come from school. I'd make them like their lunch or whatever. And, it was just like a very, very family centric place. And it just like, it felt good,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what made me fall in love with cooking, was that. And Then the French Laundry, very intense, very, very different. Obviously, like the constant like pursuit of perfection, and creativity, and to do something better, and to always do something the right way, and have integrity, and all of these things. And so for me, leaving and opening up Otium was like a way of, I had to really think about like, what does a restaurant mean to me, and I had a part of it was figuring out like, okay, where's this restaurant going to be? Like, like it was an opportunity from Mr. Broad to open a restaurant, in downtown LA, build it from the ground up. The idea that there's nobody really kind of like around there on the weekend or whatever, and it's just like he wanted to get people walking around and like really like that neighborhood kind of like thriving, and that was his goal. And so me thinking about like, okay, well, how are we going to be able to do that? Who's going to be the clientele? Who are the guests? Like what kind of restaurant is this going to be? Like was a lot of thinking about like what does a restaurant need to be, and ultimately for me, I wanted something in between. I wanted something that I knew that I wanted kids. I wanted my kids to be able to run around in this restaurant and have that same sort of experience that I experienced in my late teens. I wanted to cook amazing food. I didn't want it to be stuffy and like uncomfortable, and the feeling that you need to wear a suit or anything like that. I wanted to have diverse guests, like somebody sitting down with, that's going to go to the symphony, and next to somebody with their hat on backwards, and like just hanging out, and like two people enjoying food, and like, and in the same environment, and both of them feeling comfortable and it being fun.
Is there anything in the industry that is like an expectation? Is there an expectation that you're going to leave and have your own Michelin star place, or is it viewed as a different kind of success? You know what I mean? Do people assume that you're going to leave and go open something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the assumption of that. I wouldn't say that's everybody's expectation, but like there's definitely the assumption, especially like when you're like the head chef,
Yeah, yeah.
But a lot of people, like I can name other people that were the head chef of other restaurants that I know that are really, high end, and they don't even cook anymore. It's like people burn out, people move on. It's like, it's an intense environment to kind of, continue in. And, and then there's a lot of pressure, right? It's like, there's the thought of that, like, oh, people have this expectation of me. You know what I mean? It's like, you have to get over that, and you have to like figure out what you want.
What I want,
and because that's ultimately going to make you happy. And so there's, that's a constant struggle and a constant battle for me. It's thinking like, oh yes, I'd love to open up a fine dining restaurant, and like really like go all the way, but I know the time commitment that takes, and I have 4 kids and a wife, and like, like I left the French Laundry to seek balance, and if I open a restaurant like that, it's like people are going to expect to see me in that restaurant every day, and like it's like there's a certain it's literally a constant struggle in my head about like, what do I do, and how do I sort of maintain that? And as I get older and more comfortable with myself, I feel like, the idea is that I need to be thinking about myself, how I view myself, like, it's the only thing you can control is yourself.
Yeah.
Like, and if you are happy with what you're doing, who cares what other people think?
Sure.
And it's like being able to get over that is easier said than done, but it's something that I constantly work towards, because there's people have a lot of expectations of you.
Yeah. Talk to me about kind of the ethos of Otium, starting with, we've touched on it a little bit, but it is so calm and serene in that kitchen, and even to the point where if you get up to go to the bathroom, they tell you, well, you can walk through the kitchen right here. It's on the other side. Like, even to be able to do that, like, stuff is coming out with precision. It's good, but it's so calm in there. Is that one of the things that you wanted in a restaurant?
Yeah, I wanted, like it's orchestrating, right? It's like it's everybody's sort of working together to create this sort of seamless experience, and sometimes it goes better than others, but it's one of those things that yes, I wanted it to be a good environment for people to work in. I want it to be a positive environment. I used to be one of the chefs that yelled and like screamed, and like, I was not necessarily a nice person. And I feel like it's a lot of the pressure there. Yeah. And like, then there's a realization of like, okay, maybe this isn't perfect, but like, I know it's not perfect. Does anybody else know it's not? Right, you know what I mean? Right, it's like totally. There's just sort of like, there's this like window of room for error, like this room for like there's this acceptability window. And as long as like, you're working towards that, I think that is a better thing than like trying to get every single thing perfect every single time. It's like, it's not really realistic, and teaching and nurturing and creating a positive environment that people thrive in versus one that people are scared and like people mess up because they're scared. I think at French Laundry it was a very tough environment, and depending on who the chef might be at the time, maybe that chef was like really brutal and yelling and stuff like that, and it was also a different time. Like, this is like a while back. And
before we knew about mental health.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there was really no and that for me, I thrive in that pressure. Like, it was no problem for me. But somebody else breaks. And I've seen a lot of people break and get built back up and then thrive, and I've seen people break and not be successful in that environment and then move on and be very successful in a different environment. Right. And it's like, okay, well, you have to treat people, you have to mentor and talk to people in different ways. And some people need more pressure. Some people need less pressure. Some people need nurture. And, I think more and more people will need that sort of nurturing versus that pressure. Right. There's some people that still thrive in that pressure, but I think for the most part, it's like kind of like your mentality's changed.
Right. Talk to me about the menu. Mm-hmm. Because the menu, I don't know how you officially describe the style of the restaurant, but it feels very LA to me. Mm-hmm. In that I've had a meal at Otium where I started with naan. Then I moved to a cucumber salad that was very Mediterranean in mm-hmm. flavor. And then I had a pork dish that was very Asian in flavor. And then, Otium potatoes. By the way, Otium potatoes to me are so freaking good. And it reminds me very much of when I go to Jack in the Box, how I always have to add with 2 tacos at the end. At the end. Like, whenever you get at Jack in the Box, you have to get 2 tacos at the end of your order. Like, a meal at Otium without Otium potatoes, like, it's almost not a thing. But you know what I mean? Like, a wide swath of flavors feels very LA to me. Was that the intention? Is it best flavor wins? Like, how did you craft, and how do you continue to craft the menu?
So for me, it was, I'd say I'd go back to the French Laundry, and like how we created food there it was obviously a lot of creativity involved. But there wasn't at that time, like when I was studying food, it was all French. It was all French. Mm-hmm. Everything was French. And then at French Laundry, there was sort of influences for sure. But it was all, there's influences from other cultures, but it was all based around like French technique kind of deal, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then, so I had explored, like there was falafel sometimes at the French Laundry, or there was, some Asian dishes, some Japanese inspired dishes, like, even I remember doing like sort of a version of like Kung Pao frog's legs. It's like, we didn't call it that or whatever, but it was like, that's the sort of, in my mind where it went. And Otium, thinking about what a restaurant is and who was going to be there and conceptualizing it, I was like, okay, well, it's going to be right next to a museum. This museum's going to be a big hit, and there's going to be people from all over the world coming to like see the art in this museum. There's going to be people from all over Los Angeles coming to see it. There's going to be different, completely different demographics, and so it's very eclectic. And I was like, okay, well, what kind of, I want the menu to sort of reflect that and appeal to everybody. And kind of the way that I would describe it at the beginning and still today would be like, just kind of, it's like an American restaurant. It's a contemporary American. It's like, it's an American, to me, it's American food. And if I went to France, when I think about like, back in 2004, I went to France, I studied there. It's like, they were like, oh, hamburgers, hot dogs, Tupac, Biggie, like this is what they thought of me when I was in the kitchen.
Sure.
It's like, this is American. And America is built off of like so many different cultures.
Yeah, sure.
And especially in Los Angeles.
Especially Los Angeles, yeah.
And you can, think about in a week the types of food that you could eat if you just went around eating. And it's like I might have street tacos last night, and I might have had Mediterranean for lunch, and I might have had Japanese for breakfast. It's like, it could be literally whatever.
Yeah. And
that's America. It's a melting pot. And so what it is to me, it's like, it's American food. And it celebrates the diversity of different cultures in America, without necessarily doing it exactly like the culture does.
Right.
And I think that's important to note because, when you have these cultures that come to America and they start cooking, things change based off of the American palate. Things change based off of the ingredients that are used, all of these things, and it's kind of evolve into like, what we have today. And so it's my creativity comes from like being inspired by other cultures and doing things through other cultures. So like those potatoes are based off of, I wanted to do pomme sorlaise, and sorlaise is like a French style of potatoes. And it's like, they confit them first, and then they fry them, and they mix with like, oh man, I forget the sorlaise build right now. But, it's like this sort of version of it. And I think it has onions and like whatever, but it like onions, parsley, I forget, but it's basically like a confit potato, and then it's crisped up. So I was like, okay, this is what I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, well, what if we take potatoes and instead of confitting them in fat, what if we just take them and we steam them when we cook them? So we not boil them so they don't get waterlogged, but we steam them, and then we smash them, and then we fry them so they get these crispy edges. Yeah. And then we're using lemon zest, lemon salt, lemon juice, parsley, Aleppo pepper, shallots. It's like, so there's Aleppo pepper. Okay, that's like Syrian. It's like, you're incorporating the spice in there that has nothing to do with the French, and like, but that's the inspiration for me, and that's sort of like how it kind of all comes together. And it's like you have a potato that's very distinctly Otium, but like I don't think there's other potatoes that are similar to that out there. And I think a lot of it has to do with being inspired by other places and coming up with something.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking about something I made the other day, kind of a dish that I want to put on Otium right now. But I took falafel, the other day at the house. I had falafel. Coco's parents, my wife's parents, made falafel and like gave it to us raw. And then so I fried it. They cook all the time, so they're all constantly like sending food over for the kids and us. It's like it helps out, so we don't have to cook all the time. But like, so I take this falafel, I crush it over the top of salmon, and then I cook it, and so like it sort of attaches to the top of the salmon loin, and then when you're eating it, I served it with like a little bit of hummus and then like some pickled vegetables that were that they had brought as well that were very Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's really good. Like, like now it has me thinking of like how I can do that at Otium.
Yeah.
And it's like, falafel crusted salmon, like, what is
Yeah.
that? Like, it's like not
Same
like,
ingredients.
yeah, yeah,
New thing. I love it.
exactly. And it's fun. It's fun to just create that way. Like, truthfully, it's like you don't have parameters.
Yeah.
And like to cook without parameters is like really a cool thing.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, steamed and then fried. Last time I was there, we were like, okay, it can't be boiled because it would just smash and you couldn't be able to fry it. That's interesting. That's awesome.
Yeah, you can make them at home though. Like if we deep fry them and all that kind of stuff, but I make them at home sometimes. Or
maybe you could make them at home.
we'll make them together. It's easy, but you can you can boil them. They'll just be a little bit more waterlogged or whatever. But you have to like just kind of like cook them lightly. If they start to break open or anything like that, it becomes a little bit of a disaster.
By the way, this morning I was just kicking myself because I was like, why did I have him come here? I should have said, hey, can we record a podcast at your house while you like cook me something and we just chat while you make me something? What a moron. We're sitting in this room just chatting.
Hindsight.
So dumb. So dumb. I think it's interesting. I think your career arc kind of also matches the arc of food on TV, on competition shows. I went back and I watched season 1 of Top Chef.
Mm-hmm.
I think I could come in 5th right now. Like, it was terrible. There's like 3 good chefs that season. It's terrible. But the quality of chefs that are competing in this thing has grown. Not to mention, it's a legitimate business. Guy Fieri is everywhere on my TV. Has that been interesting to you? How have you been involved in kind of that arc? Was it something that was kind of kitsch for you, being at a fine dining chef, seeing that grow? Was there a divide, or did you feel connected to it?
There's a sort of like, I mean, when I first started cooking, right, I watched cooking channel. I watched, like Emerald on TV. I watched Bobby Flay. I watched like Sarah Moulton, Ming Tsai, all of these kind of like Food Network people just starting out. And some, Julia Child, Jack Pepin, like I watched these people, and they were like, that was like the beginning of the celebrity chef era.
Yeah.
And, to me, I sort of looked down upon that a little bit at that time.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like, no, I had 3-Michelin-star chef, and like,
right.
Like, like it's sort of, and now it's,
but I think like rightfully so at that time for what it was.
Yeah. And then now like everything has sort of changed, and now you have people getting into the culinary industry for the exact opposite reason. So they're going in there thinking, they're seeing all these celebrities, seeing all of that. So I think that sort of dilutes things a little bit but also, that creates, a lot of competition. I mean, the food in the world has changed so much since then. It's like everything was French. Now everything is like, it's cool to like celebrate your culture and show that through, like, or how you can cook really whatever you want.
Right.
It's just evolved. I mean, people are, and information is everywhere, right? Like, it's like information is everywhere. You can see what people are doing. Before, it's like, I mean, to see a picture of like all the food pictures were like in publications.
Yeah, totally.
Like I remember starting at the French Laundry, and like I would go to the, like I didn't have a computer.
Right.
Like, I had a cell phone, barely. It was like literally, and that was like a freaking Nokia, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like I had my first email address when it was like 2002. That's like a year and a half after I started the French Laundry. It's like,
right.
that's I would go home and I would read cookbooks. That's like that's where the information came from, is like from a book.
Yeah.
And now it's like, information is right there.
Yeah.
Like it's, I might come up with a dish and like be like, oh, how do you make that? Let me look. Let me Google it, and like let me see a few different recipes. Okay, and then I'm gonna go and like interpret it and do it my own way.
Yeah.
But the information is right there.
Yeah.
Before it was like, I remember one time at the French Laundry, sitting there at the past, writing the menu for the next day. I was a young chef. I was probably like 22 years old, and Thomas was, he's like, okay, tomorrow you're gonna run like frog's leg grenadinoise, and it's got parsley, lemon, and I went capers. I had to go home and like literally I looked through. I had however many books at that time, maybe like 25, 50 books. And, I'm looking and seeing which book had Frog's Leg Grenadinoise. I was looking it up. Okay, what is it? Like, how am I going to like sort of interpret this? Like literally I'm like going in the next day, figuring it out, and like, that was like how I would get information.
Yeah.
And that's like, now it's just very, very different. And I think it's cool to see where we're at today and see how it will evolve. Some of it is great, and others of it is like, information is coming too fast too.
Yeah,
it's like,
sure.
like you have experienced a restaurant before you've been to it.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I open up my fridge every night and pretend I'm unchopped.
Uh-huh.
Like, what do we have in here? I have this, and this. What can I make? This is awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. And to be able to do that, that's a talent to be able to do that. Like, some people can't look into a fridge and put things together. And even some cooks, it's like that's the ability to be able to do that. Like, is like, that shows the creative side.
Right.
Because other people might just be, they have to follow a recipe.
Right. No, I'm not a recipe guy at all.
Yeah.
Building blocks of flavors and then just try to put them together that's like the fun of it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Following a recipe almost isn't fun to me,
Yeah.
which is why I don't really bake, because you kind of have to follow the recipe more. I kind of like more, I have gochujang, I have chicken, I have lime, I have honey. Let's see what we can do with this.
Yep.
This is going to be fun. It's kind of more my style.
Yeah, mine too.
Maybe I'll cook for you at some point, but do you like go to friends' houses and they cook and you're like, oh boy, like there's gotta be a pressure for friends to cook for you.
People think that, but like, because I cook all the time, like you like, I'm just sort of grateful.
Yeah. Sure.
That someone's cooking for me. And I have the ability to be able to like just turn off my brain and eat and accept and appreciate things for what they're worth. And that could be at a restaurant too. It's like, like, I can eat a taco from a taco truck to like a 3-Michelin-star restaurant, and every single thing in between. The only thing I really care about is from like a price point standpoint, and being like, okay, like, that was really like not
worth
overpaid.
That. Yeah,
for sure. That, or, something was really not right. But like, for the most part, my expectations are kind of like, I want to just go out and have a good time. I want to be able to turn it off. Of course, there's meals where I get super inspired, and they happen in like the most random places. The dish that I won the final table with was like the sauce on that dish is a burnt allium puree, and I think that really like brings the whole dish together. And that sauce is inspired by like being in Mexico. It's not a Mexican sauce by any means, but being in Mexico and like at a taqueria.
Yeah.
And they serve like these grilled onions with lime and Maggi seasoning. And then my buddy made the salsa separately of like burnt habanero peppers. And it was just basically burnt habaneros, just pureed. And it was crazy spicy, but it had like this amazing, like, you just kept going back. It was like this depth of flavor. And so the combination of those two things in my mind created that burnt allium puree. And it's like that's the inspiration. It's not the same thing by any means, but like, that's where it came from.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. I could talk to you about food all day. But we got to pivot to talking about, God, religion, spirituality. Yeah. What does that look like in your life? What'd you grow up with? What has that journey been like for you?
Journey's been a little hot and cold.
Sure.
But, I grew up in church. I grew up in a very strict family, very strict. I grew up in a very strict church. It started in Houston, Texas, and at Calvary Chapel, and then when we moved to California, we went to Bible Baptist Church, and the preacher there was extremely strict, and so and judgmental, and it was like hellfire and damnation. It's like, it's like very being preached at,
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that were sort of, you might be shamed for doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't, I struggle with like the memory of that. But I mean, we went to church in my adult life. I struggled with that. And as a kid, it was just normal.
You're just surviving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was, we went to church Sunday morning, and then, for Sunday school, and then Sunday for main service, and then came back for Sunday night for service, and then we went on Wednesday night, and there might be there might be like youth activity, there might be go door to door knocking, or some sort of activity in the church like that we would go to as well. So we spent a lot of time in church. That was really like all of our friends, all of the people that we associated with were all like the church family.
Yeah.
And we saw people come and go, and like it was just a very strict environment. And then as I sort of got older and as a teenager, and like kind of moved away, and like like I kind of moved away from God, and didn't really allow God in my life that much. And then when I would try, or if I would go to a church, I would like always judge the church. And I would always, like, it was a very judgmental place.
Yeah.
Church was always a very judgmental place for me. So, I would judge like, oh, they don't do this. Like,
Yeah.
like, are they preach out of this Bible
Well, the
versus that
judgment is
Bible?
all that had been modeled to you.
Yes.
Yeah. You didn't move away from God. You moved away from what you had experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like, even since I've been in LA, and since I've been, church has been something that my wife and I have always talked about going, and we want our kids to grow up in church, and like, it's important to us. Finding that church was not an easy thing to do. And it was like, it was either too liberal, or there's always something about it that like just didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I appreciate about Pastor Dave is that I feel like he sort of grew up in the same style of church that I grew up in.
Totally. Yeah.
And he references that, so that it's kind of, there's this sort of comedic aspect to like, and similarities that I like, that kind of laugh at, whether or not they're extremely similar or not. Like, it's like, I think they are. And now, it's like some of the messages that he's preaching about, like, it's really, it's made me have a completely different relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very different than if I was embarrassed by my sins, I was almost embarrassed to go to God. And if I didn't feel, and I go into a church and I judge people, and I judge it's just like, that's not what God is about. That's not what the Bible's about.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's this sort of, I don't know, it took me a long time to get over it. And I only recently have become comfortable going to church and feeling like good about however I'm entering in the church, and like trying to lead better and trying to be right with God. But for a long time, it was either all or nothing, and there was never any in between.
Yeah.
And like, I struggled with that. And my mom, my mom taught Sunday school in church, and like my whole family went to church, but like my church was like, I remember my sister got pregnant at an early age, and she had to go up in church. She was probably 17 years old, and apologized for getting pregnant.
I've heard of these stories,
and it's
I've
like,
been close to these stories. Same thing, yeah.
And my other
It's
sister,
wild.
yeah, my other sister. I mean, like, that's like blows my mind. Like,
Yeah.
literally blows my mind that would happen. And my other sister, like, was dating somebody, and then like they're still together, they live together, they're not married, and like there's this, like, they're basically asked to leave the church because of that kind of deal. It's just like, I mean, whatever. God should be about that. God's not like sitting here judging you. We're all different. We all, like, it's like, you need to You need to figure out your own relationship with God. And, I feel like it's about the journey, with that versus like the judgment,
Yeah.
that judgment is just like so brutal, like to the
Well,
point where like my like literally my pastor texts me from time to time, or like, and I'm like, I can't even talk to him kind of deal, like
yeah.
I'm like, just like, so some part of me wants to like reach out and ask him questions like why
Right.
why do you do this, why do you believe in like like why is it like this, why would you do that, what makes you think that would be okay, does that like, you think God put you into this position to do that,
Right.
like to make people to drive people away from God,
Right.
like because that's what you're doing, maybe not to everybody, but
Right.
that's what you're doing.
This is really interesting because it's interesting to me that in a professional setting, you thrived under the pressure of perfection
Mm-hmm.
and somebody over your shoulder yelling at you, and but at the same time you knew on a spiritual level that that's not what was sitting right in your soul for somebody to sit
Yeah.
over your shoulder and preach damnation at you, and then you then you open Otium and create an environment where even food doesn't have to be about perfection, that there's a
Mm-hmm.
window of grace within a dish. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be perfect, even though you know what perfection is. And it feels like on a spiritual level, that's where you've come to also, that you don't have to be perfect and that there's a window of grace
Mm-hmm.
of how you want to live your life. What a what a beautiful arc
Yeah.
of both of those things. Your food journey and your spiritual journey feel very connected in
Yeah.
that sense.
Yeah. I feel like my spiritual journey is just getting, on the verge of on track, just getting there. And it's like, I feel like I was just so pushed, like so pushed away from God because of what my thoughts and my ideas are of God,
Yeah.
and the expectations of religion, and I don't know, it's just like, I don't know, it's crazy. It was very like, all we just sang was hymnals. There was no, there was nothing. There was a piano and an organ in
Yeah.
church. But ironically, my grandpa, played the guitar in church in
Yeah.
Texas, and like, it was like, and it was like, is that right? Is this right? And I don't know. It's just, it's good. And my sister's like, my older sister, she's still, still goes to church, very religious. My my brother Brian, he struggles with his relationship. He went to Bible college. He struggles with his relationship with God and the Bible, and like, it's just like my other brother, probably a little bit more distant from that. My sister, the same. But we grew up in a very similar environment, but just I feel like the pressures of religion were brutal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we started this conversation talking about how food and music are similar. And I think religion is similar in the sense that there's one book that says the same thing in everyone's book, but it can be manipulated and interpreted in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when people say, what's the one thing you would ask God right when you get to heaven? I feel like that's like, why did you allow yourself to be misinterpreted so greatly,
Yeah.
for to the point of harm,
Mm-hmm.
to the point of, for you, something you had to get through and are still getting through, harm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's so many people that have to go on that journey. And I don't even think that I would never claim that in 2024 Montrose has figured out like the perfect way
Yeah.
to do it. But hopefully we're at least in that window of grace,
Yeah.
of good enough to serve people
Yeah.
and good enough to put positivity and who close enough to like describe who God really is and
Yeah.
who you can be with him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely opened my eyes up to a completely different way, where the feeling, I mean, it's very, very different than a lot of other churches that I've been to. And there's some churches that are too progressive for me,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's, too strict. And I feel like the Montrose church, and like how everybody, is, and how they carry themselves, and how how, the from the music to the messages is like, I don't know, it feels good. Like it just really feels good. And I walked away from, I mean, church for me as a kid was like the pastor was like preaching at you.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, at the end of the service, people were going up to the altar and crying, and like, it's like this sort of like, it was not a nurturing environment.
Guilt.
Yeah, it was guilt.
Just
A lot of
guilt.
guilt.
Yeah.
A lot of guilt. A lot of shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think about communion, and I think about like, if you're not right with God, and like, the whole message was like brutal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a beautiful time for this to happen, because you can give your kids a completely different narrative than what you grew up with. And so, I mean, what a beautiful time to be going through this and figuring out yourself so that you can pass on something completely different.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's important. It's important for me to share that with them. It's important for me to teach them differently than I was taught.
Yeah.
Or I don't say better than I was taught, but like I appreciate the way I grew up. I really do. But like it's, there's things that there's obviously, even myself, there's things that I would change about myself to do better, right? Like, so it's like, how do I be a better father? How do I be, how do I provide a better home, and like, how to, raise my kids in a better environment, and all of these things, while still not being like completely easy on them and making everything easy. Like everything, it's like the world's a tough place out there. You need to be prepared for all of those things. So it's like, it's that balance of like love and like nurture and like, and discipline and like, but I don't know that I don't even know that I can ever figure it out for myself necessarily for anybody else. But, like that's again, the journey of like trying to be better, trying to get better, trying to live right. And I think God is a great person to be able to look at, to see, and to look to for the helping with those decision making, and just, raising them in a way that, it's a lot of pressure raising kids.
Yeah. Dude, I got to get you out of here.
Okay.
But what are you excited about coming up? How can people follow what you're doing? I think you're at Chef Timothy Hollingsworth on all the things, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, my wife handles a lot of that, but yeah, she's at Chef Tim Hollingsworth, or Timothy Hollingsworth maybe. And then, yeah, follow me at Otium. I have a couple projects down the road. I have a couple TV shows coming out mid this year. One is there's going to be a special on Roku about chain. That's going to be there. And then there's going to be another one is The Great American Recipe, which is a show on PBS where I'll be one of the judges for the season. So a couple media things, plus have a few restaurant openings coming in the next year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of good things happening.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for taking the time, man. Loved having you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.